Hi, I'm Greg Sandow, and I am sitting here with Nathan Kahn, who is a veteran negotiator with the AFM, the American Federation of Musicians, and we're here in the AFM's New York office, which is the central office, right, Nathan?
Right.
But you yourself don't live in New York, and you don't work out of this office.
Correct. I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Right. So this, it seems to me, is right off the bat something interesting about this organization and how it's structured.
Those of us who are out in the field in terms of negotiating, and we also have people who do service to our individual locals, live throughout the country, and we are spending most of our time on the road, and so therefore it's, while we occasionally have staff meetings here in New York, it's almost doesn't matter where we live.
Right. So just for perspective here, how many of you are there? How many negotiators are there scattered around, probably not just the U.S., but North America?
For the U.S. orchestras, we have 2 full-time negotiators, myself and my colleague Chris Durham. We also have a part-time negotiator who works out of San Francisco.
Ah, okay. San Francisco requires a negotiator of its own. We want to go there.
Actually, he is the president local in San Francisco,
yeah,
and does some part-time negotiations also.
Okay. And do you divide it geographically?
No. We used to think that would be a nice, neat idea, that I would stay west of the Mississippi. Right. But as it turns out, we kind of crisscross each other. I just finished negotiations in Charleston, South Carolina. So, and I will be going to L.A. So, yeah.
So what's it like doing your job?
Extremely challenging, very stimulating, never a dull moment, but in the end, I would say extremely rewarding and very worthwhile and a good cause.
Right. And the good cause, I would imagine, is helping orchestra musicians to stand up for themselves, to get what they need, to be empowered.
I think it's not only helping the musicians, well, yes, what you're saying about feeling empowered, it is basically to help them gain some level of control over their own work lives, and to develop a process where they can confront the issues that they face on a daily basis and have a sensible mechanism to deal with them, to deal with negotiations in a responsible manner, and thereby my colleague and I have found that we wind up doing in many cases as much educating as negotiating, because very often we sit across the table from board members who cannot be expected to have complete knowledge of the day-to-day operations, and if we can leave a situation where the musicians feel empowered and the institution is stronger, then we feel good about that.
I just want to step back historically and stress, I don't think this can be stressed enough, that some generations ago, orchestra musicians effectively had no power at all.
That's correct.
That they could be fired at will. Their employment was only for a part of the year, maybe not a major part of the year, and their salaries were very low, so that when they weren't employed by the orchestra when the season ended, they would go work behind the counter of a store or go work in a factory. And so the revolution that has occurred, basically, I guess, after the Second World War, is that right?
I think it started with, as I recall, the Philadelphia Orchestra, when there was a move towards that orchestra going towards a 52-week season, and thereafter numerous other of the major
which is the 60s, I guess.
Yes.
When that happened. Yeah, funded by the Ford Foundation.
Correct.
Something very well known in orchestra history. But as we were saying before the interview started, Nathan, this orchestra history is not that well known. And you had recommended a book to me, which maybe you should recommend to the world at large.
Well, I've just completed over the last few months a new book by a member of the Minnesota Orchestra. Her name is Julie Ayers. It's called More Than Meets the Ear, and it's a wonderful, thorough perspective on not only the history of her orchestra in Minnesota, but of the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, which is a conference of the American Federation of Musicians, as well as the AFM, and some very interesting historical data, which many of us were not, and she's done a superb job of research in presenting it.
Yeah, and I certainly don't know this stuff, so I'm going to find this book and read it. But it's just very important to know at least the outline of the history, because it's easy to come into the present situation and say, oh, X doesn't make sense, Y doesn't make sense, why does all this happen? And to understand that there was a real need for something to be done at one time,
yes,
and still is. That's really crucial. So here you are, as you described yourself. You are coming in and obviously giving the musicians in a local situation something that they wouldn't have if you were not there. But as you said, and this was fascinating to me, you're also providing educational services of a kind to the people you're negotiating with across the table. Board members who, of course, these are not professionals in music. They ought to be invaluable to the orchestra, but they may not have the solid grounding in how things work that is needed in these conversations. So could you describe something about your relationships both ways, with the musicians, what you provide to them, and then what it's like needing to educate your adversaries in the negotiation? Well,
we firmly believe at the American Federation of Musicians in strong principles of union democracy. We as negotiators are a service to our locals. A local will request that I or my colleagues come in, and our approach is rather simple. We come to the musicians and we say, what is it that you want? And we give them the means and mechanisms through surveys and interviews on how to get a consensus from their rank and file as to what it is they want in a contract. I spend a great deal of time listening to the kinds of problems that they have, and once hearing them, I can say, well, this orchestra does this, or you could do this. Ultimately, it's their decision. I function very much as an advisor.
But you have to know, as an orchestra musician, what's gone on in other orchestras.
Yes.
Because it may be that something you think you would never get is something that 40 other orchestras did get. So you have to know this stuff. And your AFM local is not likely to know that stuff either, obviously.
Right. Yeah, there are really, when I talk to committees, I say there are two components in the negotiation. I can assist more in the national perspective. They, of course, will know their local situation and what idiosyncrasies in the local situation might require this or that, and the combination of the two works well.
Right. So what are some of the issues that come up, some specific things, to the extent that you could talk about it, that you've had to advise people on?
Well, certainly wages and working conditions are very much on every musician's mind. It is I tend to work more with the smaller budget orchestras from musicians who are in many cases driving between 3, 4, 5, and 6 orchestras trying to piece together a living. So scheduling and things like that, and absence procedure, so that they are able to coordinate schedules between multiple orchestras is primary on their minds. Fair job security has been a big issue, not only in the smaller orchestras, but the larger orchestras. And we are fortunate as an industry to have as a standard a system of peer review where the final decision rests, with some variations in some orchestras, with a board of peers in the orchestra who will decide whether the musician was as alleged by the music director.